We're all ready, and we are live. Good to see you, my crypto friends. Welcome to the EOS Podcast. Today I have Anna from EOS Tribe, and she is part of the team Jedi who put together all of Dan's initial URI comments, Universal Resource Inheritance, and started helping put this group together that is now our URI Telegram channel, and it's part of a big URI movement here where we're discussing all the angles. So Anna, welcome to the EOS Podcast. It's great to have you here. And if you could start us off by talking about the first principles. This is the core of why we need URI. What's behind the need for URI? And talk about the first principles for us.
First of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I can't take all the credit for Jedi. There's a small group of really great people behind that, but I am a part of it, and it was just seeking to better understand and to help others catch up when they get into the group, what all's been said, and we can all be on the same table. As far as with URI and what the initial issue is that whether we want to admit it or understand it or not, we are in a monopoly game. It's a good analogy. And how it ends is one person is the winner. And in this case, a select few are the winner and they own the whole board. That percentage, the 5% taxation or inflation that keeps being said is actually already applied in our tax structure. And so we're just trying to change the rules of monopoly, right? So we're trying to change the rules of where that actually goes. This is not something that is a brand new idea. It's something that has been implied, and that percentage usually goes to a central banking system and or the IRS, Federal Reserve, in which it is to note that the Federal Reserve is privately owned. So you can't actually audit the Fed. That is a good idea. Has it been done? No. So it would be good to know that, especially if we're giving them a percentage of what our property or resources are. In that case, they use that percentage for what is decided upon needs the percentage, which could be their buddy, could be someone, related to them. It could be somebody that's in bed with them, that they help each other out. And this continues to consolidate wealth and power. But with URI, the idea is that if we took that same percent that everyone is already giving out and distribute it evenly amongst everyone, how would that change the game of monopoly that we're in, right? So instead of one person winning or a select few winning and owning the ownership of property and deciding upon who gets that or who doesn't, or the gatekeeping of that opportunity would be changed. Instead, we would all be given an opportunity to not have to worry about are we going to get food today? Do we have shelter? The struggles of life that take over our mind as we try to create something to give to our kids and create a legacy or a nest egg. In those situations, a lot of people are pushed into jobs or situations of which they're working multiple jobs just to provide. I feel like, in my own opinion, that this sucks the life force, the creative life force out of individuals, in which you might have somebody that is an entrepreneur for some business that does have a higher margin, when really that entrepreneur inside is a very talented illustrator, but never was able to have the time to be an illustrator. And within being creative or being an artist, you can express yourself and you can change and enlighten other people. If we had the time to figure out what our passion is and what we have to offer the world, we could probably elevate the human consciousness way higher than we are right now. Instead of figuring out when the next thing's coming, we could just figure out how can I make an impact. So the first principles of what URI is discussing is first nonviolence and voluntarism. So traditionally, when it comes to land property rights or resources that are inherited, it's something that is taken by brute force or bought by somebody from someone else. An example of this would be my family way back when we were Manifest Destiny in America. They were given the opportunity to walk from sunup to sundown. And my great for 5 greats back walked sunup to sundown with 4 of his brothers. And they all walked in opposite directions, in which they gained, a couple hundred of acreage that was to them and still is like a virgin land, because within their walk, they didn't encounter any native tribes. So they didn't have to like take it from someone, and they didn't have someone there before, and the government hasn't been there and done whatever they needed to do. It was kind of a gift. And so after that happened, they get a letter in the mail, Pony Express, signed by the president. And on that document, it says that you have this much acreage at this plot, and you also have the rights to all the mineral rights on that land forever. So within that, the inheritance that's passed and split between the brothers and so it's split down to a small percentage over time and generations. But we've discovered, oil on this land, natural gas, shale, and even diamond mines nearby. Now, not saying that I own a diamond mine, but it's just saying this is fertile soil, right? This is fertile land, and it has a lot of resources on it. Well, those resources are signed off to be ours, and we can do what we want with it, and we can split it between our relatives and whatnot. In our family, we tend to lean towards not having great respect for the land and not like raping it of its resources, or else we'd have just big holes where we inherited land. But, we tapped what those opportunities were and noticed that, and that has helped us pay our taxes. So within that, you have another argument of Dan's is, do you really own it if you're paying property taxes? You're more like running it from the government. The difference between what had happened with my ancestors and what they were actually fleeing from was a situation of a brute force takeover of land. So depending on the resources. So in our case, we might have been more meek towards tapping the resources of the earth and making a bunch of money off of them in order to preserve our inheritance, which we wanted to give, which was fertile farmland, and we wanted to pass down. There's other situations in which people take over country, brute force armies take over countries, and other countries take over countries because there is oil on the land, or because there's resources that they can make a lot of money. And when they do that, there's things that happen. Kill, steal, and destroy happens. People are overtaken, run out. And then generations happen beyond that, in which you forget how it was obtained, but it's not yours. And so when you're in a situation where you're born into a land that is not yours and you can't own any, which way can you go? You're already kind of controlled. But then who gave the government and control of that, or the ownership of that? And the way of thought of with Dan is, nonviolence is very important, and brute force is not something that we all agree with. And the idea that people are lacking or not having opportunity because they're in the middle of a system that has already been monopolized and the winner has already won is something that results in revolutions, and it results in people revolting. And that's a cycle that happens, like you'd mentioned on a previous it seems every fourth generation, I believe, is
Mm-hmm.
what you had mentioned. It kind of tries to start over, but it's starting over to the same game with the same rules, in which it always ends the same. So I think it's important to realize that we're not talking about UBI. It started with UBI. We're not talking about UBI. We're not talking about anything basic. We're not talking about income. We're talking about changing the rules of engagement or of outcome in the same game. So we can still play the game of Monopoly, but perhaps we play where each player gives 1% of what they have to the person to their right. And as we play that game, we find out that the game is never ending. And then within that, you find some players advance more because of clever plays or because of just perchance happenings in which they have more to play with, more capital gains than others, but it doesn't mean that the game is over and there's losers. So
yeah, it actually makes it more competitive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you'd mentioned that, like a lot of people mentioned, does that make people lazy? And that's something that they would deal with in their own lifetime, but it wouldn't affect the next generation. So some people may be lazy and some people may not, and they may actually help, do stuff like Tesla or, something revolutionary that helps everybody because they're no longer afraid or worried about where they're going to get their next loaf of bread. I think that's something that we should explore and try. And within that, the discussion is between a smaller URI and a bigger URI. So the smaller URI would be where we start on EOS and we see what we can do with this. Like, this is a new concept. We don't understand. Dan's done the numbers. Many people are doing the numbers in EOS math right now. And it's just something that would be exciting to try. And if it works out, then maybe the next step is a small country wants to try the same thing because they've seen the use case and it worked. And then if that country finds it successful, then that's more countries want to get on board, because it's not necessarily a wealth tax on the wealthy. It's something that just redistributes the wealth. And in Dan's article, you could see that with the math of someone's lifespan or over 100 years, we would redistribute 99.5% of the wealth. And then it would reset for the next 100 years. So it's kind of changing the game of, you inherit this because you are this person and your dad is this, but more you inherit this because everyone inherits a clean state and a fresh start on the same playing field. And what you do with that is what is on you as a reputation or your legacy, instead of what you're given as opportunity when you're born, is kind of.
Yeah, that's and that gets back to the first principle, and I really like the story that you told about your family and the land that they own, because that's a perfect example of first principles. And kind of the question is, how do we allocate the resources of the world across all the generations? And so you're talking about something generational there, and the other first principle question is kind of, how do we determine what's yours and what's mine, and where's that come from? How do we make that happen? And like you said, right now we are taxed, and we're taxed on our property, and we're taxed through the threat of basically force or violence, because if we don't pay our taxes or we don't participate, then someone will come make sure you participate, or they will stop you and take whatever property you've accumulated. So kind of this question becomes is, well, how does someone have the right to come and tax your property or tell you what you need to pay or how that needs to work? Because we can't really document who's owned this land since the beginning of time. Like, so if you look at your property as a great example, because there was probably other people who had used that land, they just hadn't claimed ownership to it. They didn't know they needed to claim ownership to it yet. So there's kind of this basis for owning land. You need to be able to somehow prove that you have a clear title to it, but that's impossible to do because there's not a way to to really prove clear title over the course of so many years. I mean, who owned that land before maybe your family had it? So basically what the first principles say that this land that's taken by aggression maybe isn't necessarily a proven title. It's been taken at some point, and it was long enough ago that we forgot who we took it from. And so now we just kind of have this imaginary clear title to it, but that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily the case. So your family is a great example because there's just this inherent belief that now, since that property has become in your family, that basically, unless something happens, that your family throughout time will benefit. And so people think, or Dan's kind of grand thought is, okay, what if instead of, one family benefiting, what if each generation negotiated, and each generation, the resources were allocated differently, or the game was made a little bit more fair over time, so that one group was not entrenched for all time until they're overthrown basically by force. Because you also talked about the Monopoly game. The Monopoly game, how it's set up, standard Monopoly is basically a model where as you gain more wealth in Monopoly and you have more hotels, then you win the game more quickly. And that's how our current society is set up, is that as you gain more power in Monopoly, you win the game more quickly, and then the game ends. What the game ending means in our current society and how it's set up is that the rich become so powerful and so rich that the only option for the people who have lost the game is to overthrow and reset the game and then start a new game. And so that's kind of this cycle that we're in. Now, the other option is to extend that game, to incentivize the game can still stay very competitive, but over time, it's an inflationary model. So there's a little bit more added, there's a little bit more money added into the system, and it's just gently shifted around. It doesn't necessarily make the people at the bottom catch up with the people who are winning the game, but it gives them the opportunity to stay competitive in the game, so the game can basically continue. And so that's the Monopoly thought, and it is a great analogy. I think it's pretty easy to understand that way. So
yeah, and I mean, like on top of that, if we're playing Monopoly and then we reset, but we play the same game with the same rules, then it's going to end the same every time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it has. And if you look at history, I mean, how many games of Monopoly have been played, and how many times has the board been reset? And that's the big thought here, is that, okay, maybe we need to stop playing the same exact game. And it doesn't take much. I mean, throwing a little bit of a small amount of distribution into the game can still remain highly competitive. It can still remain market driven. It's just giving a little bit of edge to people to stay competitive, which is an important thing. And so that's kind of the thought behind this.
To like make note of many people saying, well, the wealthy wouldn't want to do this because, they would take away their power or whatever. And in that light, it's interesting when Dan talks about how, but what if they were given a tax deduction? If we're talking in lingo of tax and inflation and stuff that we commonly understand because it's been there for a long time, then that is also something that maybe people haven't realized, is that, there could be tax deductions for giving the URI or for donating your URI to someone that could use it more, or there could be tax deductions to those wealthy that give their percentage, and which they can, earn something back in form that makes sense for them. They're not necessarily going to miss out on much, because usually if you're making over a certain amount, you have assets that make money for you. So whether you're losing a small percentage and then you get some kind of tax deduction for that small percentage, if anything, your machines are still going to be running if you've set up good economic models for yourself, if you're pulling on straws to stay wealthy, then you might need to rethink how you can do that, how you can innovate to something that may be even greater than you thought possible. So it's kind of room for growth, if anything, on a human level.
And we can take that concept and look at how now a little bit how URI actually is being proposed to work on the EOS blockchain. But so what you're saying there is that this 5% basically 5% inflation would be, or wealth tax would be paid possibly by EOS holders who have over a certain amount. But what you're saying there is also the many possibilities for those token holders to be productive. They can rent out their EOS and they can basically stake it and make rewards. And if they're using the EOS that they have effectively, that URI payment that's going out, they're going to have more than that coming in, or they're going to offset that at least. So it's not just tax the wealthy, it's just make sure that people stay productive. So if someone had a bunch of EOS and they just put it in cold storage and never let it be used as CPU bandwidth, didn't rent it out, didn't do anything, they're not being productive. So they're going to slow that unproductive locked up wealth is slowly gonna, over 100 years, is slowly gonna come back into the system so that the system can rechurn it and stay productive.
Are you there?
Yep. Oh, sorry. Cut out for a second.
I cut out for a second, but okay. I heard you say, yeah. Yeah.
So we want productive money in the system. So you can get ahead by being productive. To stay ahead generationally, you need to stay productive is kind of the key thought behind how that works. So, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, think about Rex and the opportunities with Rex, that if you keep your EOS in a cold storage or in a wallet, you're actually missing out on making more money. So it's actually, if you're hodling to make to win big or whatever, you're actually not making a wise decision with your decision to just hodl, right? Because if Rex is implemented, which I believe it will be because it's very smart and it's similar to Chintai, you sharing what you have and renting it out. Now all of a sudden you're making a small percentage off of what you stake. And then other people can use that percentage and you can use it for different things. And then that can be incentivized, So if we look at what had happened to BitShare's worker proposal system, there was a point where the fear of what was going to happen led to devs not getting money they needed to build. So I can see an incentive within Rex where, hey, you could earn this much if you move this much EOS into this fund that actually helps devs develop something that is crucial for the network. Like, there's more incentives to make a little bit off of what you have to participate than to just sit back and keep your stuff in the dark for a better day. I just think it's interesting that within that, your EOS will be a property and which you can be a landlord and make a rent off of that. And in doing so, you also help people build greater things to make it a broader network of people that brings more, which actually brings more value to the network. And within that same thought, having limited EOS and having that rented on DEX will raise the price because it will be used for something instead of just out there in wallets and sitting around. So letting it sit somewhere is actually not going to raise the price value, but by using it and it be a limited limiting the supply will raise the value of EOS in general.
Yeah, BitShares is a good example because it sounds like what happened is that the whales who would have had been funding these worker proposals for developers were afraid of inflation. They didn't want to devalue their coins, so they kept their money unproductive because they were scared of inflation, and it ended up, stagnating BitShares, which is the exact opposite of what you want to happen. In a vibrant economy, you want, that to be, that money to keep moving. And so that was kind of a downfall of the BitShares idea. And you also mentioned looking at EOS as property. And so to relate this to real estate, just to give someone a picture of the theory of URI as well. So say you own a $1 million property, and with URI 5% per year, you'd be paying to own that property, 5% basically wealth tax on that property. Now it'd be easy to make that 5% back if you rented the property out. You could rent out, to people, have them come in and actually utilize the property and make that property a productive resource. But if you just sit that property there, no one can use it, the house is empty, then you're going to pay that 5%, and over the course of about 100 years you're going to lose that entire property. So it's not it's incentivizing people to stay a productive part of the economy.
It's true. And to build on that, imagine you have a piece of land that is underdeveloped and you never develop on it. So in Texas, you can have tax deductions for having agriculture, it being a land that has agriculture or is producing some kind of good or fruit or anything. So if you have some fruit trees on your land, you can claim it as an agricultural tax deduction, and then in which that land is helping you save money. And if you're selling that fruit, then that land is helping you make money. If you have a big plot of land and you're just sitting on it and waiting, and then the development never gets to that point because there's no development on the land to incentivize people to come there. Like if you never put a water well on your land, people need to drink water, right? So if you have land and you create this and you have a huge water well, people, back when it's not developed, people gravitated toward where the water source was and built around it. You would be negligent to the ownership and the privilege that you have on the land, or EOS, if you didn't engage in some sort of development using it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think this idea of incentivizing people to stay productive with their EOS is one of the bigger pieces of URI for me. So with the inflation, Dan put out a second article that talks about this 5% inflation, and on a grander scale, where that would come from and how that would look outside of EOS, because a lot of people jump in and they say, oh, this is, communism, or this is, I don't want to redistribute wealth, or, there's these real gut reactions, which when you consider UBI, universal basic income, libertarians are generally kind of against that or push back on it. Like, no, we want competition. But the nuanced argument here is different than that. It's not UBI. URI is something that comes from a much different place. It's not about helping the needy necessarily. It's not about what people need. It's about, we have this natural resource that is here, that each day is kind of anew and can be given out to everyone equally. And then we can play the game from there. So it's not a need-based thing. It's a resource, what we have as resources naturally being distributed. And so I think that's a big point there as well, that this isn't like a welfare program necessarily. Mm-hmm. It's much different than that. It's very competitive based.
He had mentioned that even the thought of giving welfare to someone is an unfair advantage to the person receiving the welfare. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I can see my interpretation of that is that, the mindset of someone is the most important engine of what you can innovate. So if your mindset is, I am poor and I'm receiving welfare, then you're going to act like a poor person receiving, welfare, as in you need things and you don't have enough, and there is a lack of things. So the mindset is of scarcity. And when you say, hey, here's a welfare check, you're creating a mindset of scarcity. When you have over, the large percent of the population in a mindset of scarcity, then they're going to act out of fear and act out of survival instead of acting out of abundance. So I can see how that's a disservice, and I also see how it is helpful. But if we're rethinking how the structure could work, if everyone has a clean slate, and is on the same field, same level ground, in which they can go out and do, either they can be productive or they can sit, in virtual reality all day long, and in which they are. I feel like maybe not being good stewards to the URI, but that's not our decision to judge people. It's what they do with it. And while other people would be like, oh, thank God I don't have to worry about what I previously worried about. And now I can tap into my creative energies and discover what I have to offer the world. And in which case this creates an abundance mentality. And when we all have an abundance mentality, then abundance is free flowing, instead of only to those that can maintain that mentality. And some people that are in the scarcity mentality don't even know that they are, and don't know anything different, because it has been repeated over generations and generations that this is just, my family came from nothing, and this is, we do what we can, this life's a meat grinder. We, some things that we feel or reflect that the world is about, when in other situations, when people come from abundance, they think the world is their oyster. Anything is possible. And even so, in that case, I think it would be an interesting experiment for those that are wealthy and that have kids that become spoiled and do nothing and then squander their inheritance, for that to be, like he's saying, renegotiated each generation. So it's not something that where the father is, his great deeds and sacrifices are squandered by a privileged, spoiled kid that doesn't understand the value, in which there's other, kids that, like Abraham Lincoln was in a log cabin and became president. So obviously he had higher hopes, but than that. And in the same case, you see people who have rich dads or come of privilege, where they squander and they shame their father. And I feel like if the father could understand the possibilities of URI, he probably would sign his kids up for that, so they can learn the value and appreciate each other and appreciate opportunity more, instead of squandering that and not realizing their own self-value. I think that URI helps to change human consciousness in that respect.
Yeah, and it's in the generational aspect of the father, that son and the grandson is an interesting thought experiment with URI, because so the father's productive. He's very productive, accumulates this great amount of wealth. Now that wealth just has a slow drip that's kind of re-churning into the system. It's not going to be taken from him, but when it's passed to his son, that slow drip is going to continue. Now it's up to his son to continue to be productive with that wealth. If he doesn't, over the course of that son's lifetime, that wealth will dissipate. And when it gets to the grandkid, there won't be anything or much to pass on. So it's this conversation generationally, like, here's this wealth, it's slowly dissipating. You need to be a productive citizen, or else your kids aren't going to have the same opportunity that you had. So as it currently stands, what can happen is that wealth can be locked up, and generationally, it can be generations of non-productivity, of not adding to society, of not continuing to, because they basically have won the game, and now they're entrenched. They've won the monopoly game, or they've gotten so far ahead that they now can't lose. And that's what, that's the downfall of the monopoly game. So this slow churn and this small incentive to add productivity doesn't change the competitiveness of the game, just generationally, it makes sure that there's a slow turnover if no one's being productive. And I think that's like such a nuanced point, that it's not taking from the rich. It's not. And okay, to that point, looking at where this 5% comes from, because that's kind of the, well, where's this money coming from? You're going to take it from the rich. Well, so it comes from three places. It comes from, and we're going to go outside of EOS here into a bigger concept of URI with this money, this 5% coming from three places. So money, equities, and real estate. So with money, right now, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the US dollar are all inflated by more than 5% per year. So a 5% inflation is not, economically is not unreasonable. So a 5% inflation with that money being churned back into the system with the universal resource inheritance is a reasonable place, just as far as straight cash goes. Equities. So there's this thought that we give a lot of rights to companies and corporations, as you know. They can basically, they don't have a lot of liability. Like, so let me look here. It says that a company causes a catastrophe, like let's say, shareholders in those companies aren't really liable. So if you own, say, stock in BP, and BP has that giant oil spill, then you as a shareholder, you're not liable. So you're getting a certain amount of rights there. So the thought is that these companies could be taxed at 5% as well, really easily. And taxing these companies at 5% would add a ton of money into the system. There's corporations all over the world that tax would mean very little to, and that get a lot of benefits. And so that was where another 5% could come from. And real estate's already taxed. So these basically tax, like inflating the money supply by 5%, corporate taxes and real estate taxes is three places that that the money could come from. And the real estate was an interesting one, because he says that this is kind of a tough concept to grab for me, at least, but all real estate goes into a company, and then you basically purchase your real estate or if you own a certain amount of this real estate, if you own over 51%, basically you have property rights to that land. And every year, 5%, that's increased by 5%. So basically you need to continue to buy 5% of the property, or how it would look in layman's terms would be, if you own a home, then you'd pay 5% a year to keep the home, and that's it. And then you could sell your rights at any point. So those are the places that the URI and 5% would come from in the real world. If we're talking in some sort of grand scheme where you could actually implement this, like in an entire country. So, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's sometimes people get caught up on, it's hard to distinguish how the real world application into this virtual application. Right. And so the thought of giving away 5% of something of yours is like, wait a minute, no, I don't want to, don't tax me. No, like, how can you do this? Like, I'm not going to do it. You're already taxed that 5%.
Yeah, I guess that's the main point. To get to the heart of what I was saying there, is like, we're already taxed way more than 5%. We're already taxed, we're taxed 40% in some cases. And so like 5%, like, and we're talking about this 5% doing everything. So like, get rid of the other thoughts of all these taxes, and like, it's going down to 5%. It's not like tacking 5% on top of everything else. So that's kind of the point, to get to the heart of what my kind of incoherent ramble just previously.
No, it wasn't incoherent. You walked through it, and then along the way, you're going to have people that are going to be like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to give up 5% of this. And you're like, it's too late. You already do. And if you don't, you're going to be arrested, or your property is going to be brute force taken away from you by the government. So like you're already doing this. It's about where is that 5% going? Instead of that 5% going to some privately owned company where you don't know where it's going to go, or it goes into programs like welfare or, child support or social workers or all these things that we've proven are broken, that need help or that are not set up correctly. How about you decide that you want your 5% to go towards to a URI that helps regenerate people and give opportunity to actually create more innovation and more wealth in general. So like it's not necessarily like we can't get too caught up on comparing the UBI and the, oh no, don't tax me that. And like, you already are taxed. Like it's about deciding where that percent goes. So in real life application, it might play out a little different, but it is the same, it's same ideals of where that would come from. Like you said, the money, the equities and the real estate. But in the smaller paradigm with EOS, we have the same thing. We have our EOS, we have equities in EOS, we have monies, we have investments, and we will have real estate all in the same assets. So we are active landowners in that instance on EOS. And now we get the opportunity to decide, instead of playing the same Monopoly game, how about we play the game with different rules and see what happens? And it's not necessarily that it's going to devalue and you're just giving away free money. It's actually just reinvesting into the ecosystem and trying a different approach. And if it works, then it's a great use case for countries that actually need something. They're desperate for something different. And within that, like, if it is a successful use case and countries prove in real world it's a successful use case, then more countries will take on that. And I think that's why he went for universals. And the end goal is that if this could be universally applied, the math makes it work out to where there's more opportunity and less consolidation of power and wealth, and which also leads to corrupt cabal systems that we're trying to escape in EOS. And yes, those systems have followed us here, and the mind thought of that is following us here. But at some point we have to decide, are we trying to build a digital nation that's completely different that we've never seen before? Or are we trying to repeat the same traditions or things that have worked for centuries and 5,000 years, and apply that to a different way of thought in which we'll get the same results? So we could play the same game, but let's just change up the rules. Let's change up, you're going to be taxed anyways in the real world. What if we tried that system that actually replenishes and gives people opportunity to discover what they might come up with to build on or do? And Dan had mentioned he was working on a nonprofit for this idea. And in many cases, without the standard thought of how nonprofits function in our day in society, the thought of giving and giving to those, just giving in general, the URI is kind of like a nonprofit. You know what I mean? Like it kind of is like, hey, donate here. And with him saying, hey, there is the idea that you get incentivized for donating your URI or for the 5% that you put back into the URI, then that is like a nonprofit donation tax deduction. So it really is a revolutionary idea. This is not evolutionary at all. This is revolutionary, because we're not building on the same system and just manipulating it, because we've seen how the game ends the same way. And revolutionary game of thought, it's like, hey, let's change the rules and let's do something completely different. And I just hope that people are open to a deeper understanding of that. And I think that's where the idea of Jedi came out, was that the conversation started in Rex Telegram group, and in which the idea of UBI came up, and it sparked controversy, and it also sparked interest. And the conversation started to get real deep into it. And someone deep in that conversation with Dan specifically was Jack. And Jack said that he was completely against UBI and, you know, stated his case for that. And he was open to having his mind changed, and in which he went back and forth with Dan in this. And within that, the admins of the Rex group were like, hey, stay on topic, you know? And he was like, you're right, we should stay on topic. And what he told me privately is like, but then I thought, you know what, F that. No, because I'm actually having a good, deep conversation with Dan. I'm going to go back into it. So he went back in and kept the conversation going, in which we were kind of like, you need to get out of here. And so Anita, I believe Jack reached out to Anita and said, hey, can you start a URI group or UBI group at the time? And I was there watching it play out, and she started a UBI group, and like a huge chunk of people immediately jumped into that room. And it's obvious that that is of great interest. And the conversation went out in parables and metaphors and just all these different thoughts that like sparked, you know, a deeper philosophical questioning to like, why do we think that way? Could it be done differently? And in that instance, I think later on that night or whenever is when Jack reached out to me and was like, hey, and I've never met Jack. I've never talked to him before, but he told me, I'd seen him in the space, and he's been in the space for a long time. He said that he just had an instinct to reach out to me, and he had been talking to Anita, and that instinct was that he wanted to dig in deeper to what the conversation was, because he felt like he was too stuck in his own head and ego to understand what Dan was saying. And he felt like he did a disservice to himself by being so strong in his standpoints to not see the bigger picture. And he was really concerned with, I'm losing the wisdom because I'm too into my own thought. Can you help me organize a doc or group of people that can organize a doc to document all of the conversations and context that started in Rex and that continued in the UBI group at that time, which later became the URI group after dishing it out. So we created this document in the URI group. It's pinned at the top, and it's just a document that people can view and comment on. And it's the context conversations. It's close to 60 pages long now. So when people come there, we could say, hey, go look at this doc and catch up, and then let's talk about it, instead of, oh, I don't want to do this. And I was like, well, listen to the whole train of thought first. And within doing that, back in my head, I really wanted Dan to be like, I need to write about this because they're just not getting it, you know? Yeah. And in the meantime, it's like, well, we're not getting it. Let's try to read what he's saying and read between the lines or come up with our own ideas. So it's like a small group of us that started the doc. It wasn't meant to be like a huge movement, but it kind of became something that we realized after putting out that doc and it helping people write articles. So at first Anita was able to write an article about it. And then we're like, oh, okay, so now we can read it all at once instead of going through all the conversations. And then weeks later, Dan came out with his first explanation of our URI. And for me, I was like, yes, we did it, but we knew it was coming. But it was just like the topic's so hot and so exciting. The most important thing is that we discovered it's not a UBI. It's not basic. It's not income. It's a revolutionary, different way of thinking. It's something that on the grand scale of things, it could change how the world is displaced due to brute force takeover of land and property and resources, and make it more of this world that is enlightened, that, enlightened consciousness. So we could be an interplanetary species, like we could be at the next level instead of down on a lower vibration in which we feel like, well, what's the point? It's consolidation, world power, there's cabal, like there's always hope, and I feel like the URI is a hope to a different thought on that. So I guess that's a little history of that. It was out of seeking to better understand what it was. And
yeah, that's a really cool little recent history for us there. That's so cool.
yeah.
It's evolved so quickly. When you talk about the possible global impact on people as a culture, if something like URI were to be prominent, like for me, the asymmetric risk of URI becomes a no-brainer, because a lot of people say, oh, there's 5%. Oh, it's, for me, it's okay. It's 5% as a downside, but the upside is possibly taking the first step that forever changes humanity and ends this system of wars. And, I know it's a long shot for URI to get adopted, or maybe that it'll even work, but the asymmetric risk is for me, is not something I'd pass up. Like, I'll throw 5% at that. Let's see what happens, because this is something different. This isn't what we've seen before. This is a shift in consciousness, and I'm on board with that type of thinking all day. And I love digging in, and the Telegram channel, like you said, is a great resource. And what you guys did with Jedi is a fantastic resource going through, because you can have consolidated Dan's thoughts and answers to questions kind of, and watch the idea progress. So I definitely suggest people read the Jedi document. Also, Dan has the 2 Medium articles now, and then there's the video of his Virginia Tech Talk, which is a really, the 2-minute version is a really concise description of kind of how this thought process works on a government and tax level. So yeah, I mean, what a cool, interesting time we're in, and thank you guys for doing that. I mean, what a on the ball thing to do, is to get all that information into a document. That's how I caught up when I initially came to the URI channel. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Like, I can't take the credit for that. I just suggested, and there was, we all mutually suggested in different, private conversations, and in which we collected, the same names were collected. I perchance, I was picked. I was not, that's not something that I influenced. I'm humbly honored and grateful that I was thought of. And I do feel like it is a great responsibility to try to keep what he's trying to say and what the FOMO that people are believing or trying to trail into there, clear between what Dan says or has said or has alluded to and what people are afraid of, so we can get rid of the fear of the unknown and get to what is known and where are we now. I think it's interesting also the fact that B1 has mentioned that they want to burn the worker proposal system fund. And in my mind, when Dan brought this up, I was like, so we don't have to burn it. We can actually reuse it, and we can use it as a resource to make more of. So, and, instead of burning that fund, or, there's still the argument of V1, V2. There's still a really great group working on a worker proposal system. There's conflict within the community of which way are we going to vote. It comes to education and what they want, and Dan has mentioned that the only way for Rex and for URI to work, V2 would have to be in place, and that's not to instill fear on anyone. I personally think that there probably could be a hybrid of V1 and V2 and be a V3, but
can you explain V1 and V2 for people?
Oh, sorry. So version 1 of the Constitution, I was referring to as V1, and version 2 of the Constitution I referred to as V2. Well, version 1.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Version 1 was written by somebody that has great experience in how to write something like that, and it was collaborated with B1 and with the community, in which many months went into the thought of that, and a lot of hard work and dedication and volunteers thought that out to be best, and they agreed upon that, and which right before launch, some things changed right before launch, but the community overall that were engaging in the government Telegram group, which was a lot, had input and were able to comment and go back and forth in the EOS Go forums, and and like really hash out what they think was a good constitution for us to stand behind and to actually sign when we buy EOS. So it's an interim constitution. It is the current constitution that we all have to uphold to as EOS holders, but it needs to be ratified. And so to ratify that, we have a referendum. I'm actually honored to be helping the great group of BPs that have volunteered their time to build the referendum. Those BPs are, it started out with a smart contract push by, I believe it was Michael from EOS 42, in which people were like, oh yeah, we should get on this. And then it was taken over by EOS Canada and EOS Nation, a Gray Mask, EOS Tribe, my BP operation that I'm a part of, and Jenner EOS. And together they're building this referendum that is going to be a public platform that is going to be BP neutral. It's going to have credits, small credits that you can figure out who is a part of this and the thinking behind it. And the part that I play is a small part compared to the great thinkers behind it and the coders. But Steve Floyd, the co-founder of EOS Tribe, is a great man of thought in the UX and UI. He's spoken internationally about it for almost a decade, UX, UI, and design. And he believed, and he's way into UX is the key to mass adoption, and that's something that he pushes in UI.
Absolutely, yeah.
So he played out this document and put it in the GitHub, and he put it in the forums, and he published it on Steemit about what it might look like and how we could get everyone to trust one portal to vote for referendum. Because what he found is that we're so decentralized that everyone would go to different forums, and then there could be fake forums that come up that look like a forum, and then who do you trust? And then people are all scattered about, when really it needs to be an initiative like what happened with the voting portal, which Steve was also part of, Nathan James and many other people. The thought that you have one place that you know was built by the community, and you can trust that there's a good nature behind it, and there's no flag waving of BPs in the middle of it and trying to like separate, but a place you can just go and you can vote and trust that it's something that is what it says it is. So the same thing with the referendum, a platform in which you can get all the information at once. I was honored to be able to help do the content strategy behind it. So within the different sections, it's more about educating was the main goals. Like we want to educate people on what the forum would be, educate people on what the worker proposal system is, educate people on what the referendum is. We want to educate people on what, I'm missing one, but it's another, what the recording contract is that you're signing, on the Constitution, on the Constitution Amendment that the referendum is based on, which is Article 11, I believe, which is a pretty high standard. So within that, we wanted to educate everybody on what it all is, give them a link to go there to learn more, or stay on the referendum platform and actually vote. So the referendum is going to either ratify Constitution V1, which was very good constitution. It's human-centered. With strong, principles of no violence and things that we're all about. And within that, I believe the incident of what happened with the chain freezing because of the bug that was found, and it being something that was built into the code to stop it from forking. It's actually a safety mechanism to keep the chain from forking. Within that frozen time period, several people had hit up ECAF and begged them to freeze their account because it was unstaked and was about to be stolen. So there was about 28 people that had one that just lost it because the bug was replicating and dividing half of what it was and pushing it into new accounts, and then half of what that was into a new account. And so the bug was pushing it further and further away from being able to be stopped, but there were some that were able to freeze their account. And how that played out is ECAF was underfunded and not ready for something so quickly like that to happen. And they were overwhelmed, and there was a lot of backlash for that. And I think what Dan was thinking is that, we need to get back to what the original thought of it was, is that code would take care of most of these things, and in which the intent of code is law. And when it is outside of that, then you would go to a human or some other layer to help you resolve the issue. But otherwise, let's have something to where code kind of takes care of it. Like it's been written, it's been agreed upon. We can update smart contracts on EOS, which is not something you could do on other blockchains without forking it or changing it completely. So it's more of like, to me, it's more of a revolutionary way of thought. It's separating for the traditional constitution, that we're all used to, amendments and things like that. And it's more of saying, hey, let's automate as much as we can. The intent of the code is the law. If something outside of that, we need to, deal with that. But otherwise, let's try to self-execute using the code instead of putting it in the hands of people that could be corrupted, in which, there's defense to all that. There's defense to, well, you can vote them out or they can be replaced and whatever for Constitution V1, in which I advise everyone to go on the Alliance calls and join the coverage of Constitution 1. They cover in Mandarin and Korean and English 3 days a week. It's a 12-week program. I'm unsure in what week we're into right now, but I believe we're a little bit halfway in there. And then recently, after I kind of gave a stink, they started covering V2. And the reason I say that is because I came in there and I was like, hey, let's cover V2. I want to be able to compare. And they were like, well, wait till the 12 weeks are up and then we'll cover it. But if you want to cover it on your own, by all means. And then that's when EOS Ignite June covered it for the first time. And then the people that were on that call were semi-mocked in the channel that they wish it would go more sophisticated and stuff like that. And which led to Alliance stepping up the next week and having their own version of covering B2. So I feel like I was successful in that, and I know other people were behind that. It just wasn't me, but I just feel like we should understand V1 and we should understand V2 of the constitutions. V2 proposed by Block 1 and Dan, which is the intent of code as law, and V1, which is based on a more traditional thing that we can all understand and know of and has been played out for 5,000 centuries, to understand those two and to see where we align, or to make a decision between whether we want Rex and URI or not, or we want to continue to have things like ECAF or online dispute resolution be in the hands of humans or companies that offer that. I don't know. It would be cool if the B1 wallet had an online resolution, online dispute resolution within it, kind of like Uber Eats or Uber or Amazon, to where you like lost key and you push it through and then the code automates something and then you get your new key. Or you have, stolen key, you put your issue into the wallet and then it does its thing that's already thought out, and it stops the key that it's, it helps you like automate that instead of it being on a person having the time and resources to look into it and then talk about it. And, it just kind of is a slower process outside of what the possibilities could be. Because, I don't know, I guess I'm idealistic in the thought that I would like to be able to just file a claim on so-and-so. The claim is I do it in my wallet, it's secured, it's on chain. And then that goes through a process in which it queues up and then it's compared or whatever. And along that lines, there's still probably going to be a human layer to that, which could be built into its own, like for B1 to come out with its own online dispute resolution within the wallet would be just brilliant.
Yeah, it would, huge.
Yeah, instead of having, well, this company is going to get this much money to do this, and then you could pick what company you want, and then all these competing be like, this is the secured person that, put out the code, and I got this in an app store, and it's on my iPhone, and like, I feel like I'm getting kind of like instant responses here, and I'm getting instant reactions, and within that, I'm giving like a queue of how long this might take, and we're looking into it, we'll get back to you. And I'm getting that instantly instantly gratified, because that's the kind of world that we're in now.
Yeah, well, and to your point earlier, the UX there is the most important part. And when you look at, someone like Steve Jobs, how he operated is he went to the customer and then he worked back to the tech. And I think this is, for me, kind of an example of that. What's the user experience look like? How do you keep people interested or actually using EOS, or make it just, they're pressing a couple buttons and they're getting their issue solved, as opposed to, filing a claim with some sort of bureaucracy that's going to have to get back to you in a couple of weeks. And that's just off the cuff. That older model, like, I think that we're pushing away from as rapidly as possible to try to bring in this new era of blockchain. So
hey, I wanted to say an interesting thought on that. What was mentioned around the time that right before launch was like, a few of us at the Bash House, you were there, had mentioned it's going to be interesting to see who runs towards things that have a bunch of money involved and who runs towards volunteering their time to build things that we actually need. So you notice that with people that built the voter portal and were working on the referendum and other tools like EOS Toolkit, things that people are out of their own goodwill and generosity to know that we need this, let's build it, I'm volunteering this, let's get funding, let's figure it out, let's do it. And then spending all the waking hours trying to make it happen. Those people are in the true spirit of voluntarism, and then there's also people that are in the true spirit of voluntarism and all the time they spend on worker proposal systems. But within that, a lot of people that were initially in it were kind of fell off, and then there's a new reign that's there too that are helping push that. And to the worker proposal system, I'd like to say, hey, Dan said that worker proposal system is a good idea. He just doesn't want it to repeat why he left BitShares. He left BitShares because of the situation I talked about earlier. The worker proposal system got held up because they didn't want to help the devs. And Dan's a dev. We want to build shit. We don't want to sit around and just fund all these committees and fund all these people that are worker bees and that are pushing paper. We're trying to get rid of the paper pushers and challenge them to who are you really outside of stacking paper and being the middleman. Like, who are you really? And some people are really good middlemen, and there's still place for that. I feel like that there's still place for the worker proposal system. There's still place for URI. It's just, can we learn from past history mistakes, and can we get to a point that we realize that, it is a honeypot and there is corruption circling. And that's the reason why as soon as the worker proposal system Telegram popped up, I was like one of the first, several people in there, because I was afraid. I feared what this would do. I greatly feared it. And getting in there, I realized there was a lot of work left to be done, and which I didn't have time to to go back and forth on how it should be and how it should play and all that time and that it took. And I knew that people that did have that time would take over, and there's good people working on that. But it was because I was afraid. I was afraid, whoa, we're seeing what's happening with whale votes. We're seeing what's happening with vote trading. We're seeing what's happening behind the scenes. And this is setting up for our sweet honeypot to be taken over by bears. And that I had fear for that. But I know that there's some good people in there, like Brendan's in there. There's a lot of great people working on that. But at the same time, who can you trust, right? So we're in a trustless system, but within that, who can you trust? You have to find out what people's motivations are. And I think that goes along with the whole game theory, we're in a great experiment, right? And within these things, we're kind of tested, what are you made of? What do you do, right?
What's a worker proposal system look like that that doesn't look like BitShares? Or how, you said that you're worried about a worker proposal system that goes the same way as BitShares. What do you think the kind of direction that would be good for the worker proposal system is?
That's a tough question. Let's be honest. That's a tough question.
Absolutely.
Right? It's a good question. With the worker proposal system, I guess the main fear is that there's so much money being pumped into that account, and it's actually about equal to what would be needed for the URI. So like kind of a saving grace. Like, how about we try and see what everybody can do with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the issue of it, of not being able to push something forward because you don't have the right backing, or because people that have the most stake don't want you specifically, Happy Money Man, to have that opportunity. So they don't let you do it. And then they rewrite what you wanted to do. And then they push their guys onto it. That's a big concern. Like, it is, because
for sure.
like it, and this goes along with, I'm really excited about being able to validate our identity and having a reputation system, because to have people that have the power and to consolidate that power and push it into people that they have an alliance with, or not to use that word in any context or anything with the alliance, but that have like a similar agreement with each other, that, hey, I put you in that spot, you give me this thing, and then we continue to do this thing that we're trying to get away from, which is consolidation of wealth and power. So I feel like that's my fear, the worker proposal system. But we can't necessarily always act in just fear. We have to be able to be open and try it. And so, like, to be open and try and see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, we all vote it out or whatever. Like, people should still have the fair chance to try and see what happens, instead of us fearing and shutting down. So that's why I was excited when Dan said, hey, yeah, there is a good place for a worker proposal system, but we should learn from past mistakes. We shouldn't. Yeah. We have to think of I think what he's trying to say is we have to think of the devs first. Like, we have to make sure that money is used to help build and not to help just be there.
Yeah. And what you said about the whales basically be able to put their guy in, or, we don't want this person, but we'll let this person do that same job is a really valid point. And I hadn't thought of that angle before. I thought of other angles, but, Dan did BitShares, and then he also did Steemit. And when you look at Steemit, the Steemit witnesses, the top 21 witnesses, it's somewhat relatable, because the people who have power on Steemit, or the whales, and the witnesses themselves have voted themselves into these top 21 positions, and there's no turnover. So as a new witness, which I was, but I stopped because it was futile. As a new witness, you come in kind of bright-eyed, like, oh, I'm going to be a witness and add to the ecosystem. And then you realize there's basically this cartel of power that there's no way to break into, and that they will protect and control their position of power because they make money off it. And so unless you have some sort of backdoor into the cartel, then it's all smoke and mirrors. And you could see that, that's one of the inherent flaws with Steemit. And that's probably part of the reason that Dan left, is because at the base structure, there's a flaw. Yeah. And with the worker proposal system, you could see that over time being a sort of cartel being built around who's going to get access to these worker proposal funds. Like, yes. Oh, you're a dev and you can build this beautiful thing. Perfect. Thanks for the proposal. Now we're going to put our dev into that position.
And do the same thing and use all your hard work and everything, but correct. Give it to our cousin,
Yeah. and so that's such a second layer attack vector that I hadn't considered, but that is a very natural progression. It's not, this isn't a attack on any individual person. This is a thought of human nature, and over time, how power coalesces around honeypots, let's say. So, and I don't have a real good idea on a fix to that. Yeah. We'll let someone else come up with that. I'll come up with the problems and let someone else come up with the fixes. But just kidding. But yeah, that's definitely another part of this thought experiment with worker proposals. So I'm gonna have to add some thought.
I think that would be a great interview for the future, for one of your shows too. Like even like a series on arguments for and against. Because if you look at the poll right now on Telegram, of like overwhelmingly like 60%, well, it's only out of like 120 people or so, or 119 last I checked, want the URI over worker proposal system. And it's like, we need to look into what are the arguments for and after, because people have been spending many, many months working on the proposal for the worker proposal system, and they've been thinking it out, and they've been putting in a lot of hard time. And some of those people probably want a job on EOS, so they don't have to do what they're doing, and they can do what they love. So the idea of worker proposal system to me is something like, oh, I could propose something and I could get paid. Like, I could propose things that I'm good at and get paid to do that and build value to EOS. Like, that's an awesome idea. And we don't want to shut people down that do want to work on things that benefit EOS. We want them still to have an opportunity to get funding to do that too. So I think the argument for and against, with people working on it, with people that have seen it before on BitShares or whatever, would be a really interesting segment for you to cover as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually looked for, I looked to bring someone onto the show who was, I tried to set up a conversation or a debate with a pro worker proposal and against, but I was having trouble finding people against the worker proposal, or at least who had really, strong enough opinions to come on and talk about it. So, so I'll look back into that. I've had a couple worker proposal pros, and it'd probably be best if I just came up with some cons or some arguments against and pose them myself to some pro worker proposals. And I'm still undecided on worker proposals. It's such a complicated topic. Sometimes my gut reaction is just burn it, and then sometimes my reaction is, well, this it's going to push the system forward at some point. Like, who cares if some of the power gets consolidated and some of the funds are funneled to people, but there's still going to be stuff being built, so maybe it's worth the trade-off. So I kind of go back and forth on those two.
Another point on that is, like, I don't know if you saw the Elon Musk and the Joe Rogan interview recently.
Of course.
Okay. Well, I'm a fan, so of course I saw it. But in that, we
have to get Dan on Joe Rogan, by the way. This is kind of the start of an underswelling of hype to get Dan on Joe Rogan. That's next level. So
yeah. And within that, he is talking about how he tried to warn people about AI. And he looked really hopeless and sad. And you just would be like, oh, Elon, you can give him a hug, right?
I know, he's like, I tried.
It'll be okay, love, right? And, and at the end, he's like, love's the answer. It's like, he kind of gave up hope, and the only hope is love, and let's go to Mars, and let's fly around the moon. Let's try to get out of here. I don't know. So it was kind of sad. But which he proposed, like, a AI oversight committee, in which they form an official committee that goes and sees what people are doing in AI, and to list out the possible risks to humankind or whatever, and then to have oversight on what those possible risks are and where they're located, and how we can, like, help pivot around those risks or to lower what the potential risk could be. I see a great opportunity for an oversight committee for EOSIO. I wouldn't want it to be all community based. I would want people from B1 or Dan on there, so we align with what their vision is, because of course they have thought out what the next 5 years are going to look like on EOSIO, and they have ideas, and to be able to build those ideas, certain things need to line up, and it would be interesting to have a good mix of community and B1 or Dan and other people come together and kind of create an oversight. So if we have the worker proposal system and it passes, and we're able to start doing that, but if something starts to happen, some sort of collusion or cabal starts to form, or there's like a groupthink that is taking over and controlling the voice of EOS to other people, and it's just not clear that there's some kind of oversight committee that's able to say, hey, wait a minute, we've seen this and this, what do you guys think? And they can have kind of a meeting of the minds to decide on, is this good for EOS or is this hindering it? Because the main goal is we want a fertile ground to fruit, many, great fruits, and which is, to help devs build beautiful things, have a healthy community, and have money flowing in abundance for all, instead of being a repeat of things that we're trying to get away from. I just thought that was a good idea, and I was like, oh, that could work for what we're trying to do too. I would just be wary of it all being volunteers from the community, because I think committees and things that self-organizing within the community has gotten people to be kind of on their toes of whether they trust it or not. I think if we had some trusted advisors on the board too, to voice their opinions on it, it would be something that would be quite healthy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess the main thing that has to happen before the worker proposal in URI is the referendum voting portal, and
it's coming.
It's coming. It's
it's
on
coming.
the way. So we've got really kind of exciting times coming up with the referendum voting portal, URI, worker proposal system, the hackathon coming up in London, the hackathon coming up in San Francisco, some big announcements coming from Block 1. It's not even October yet, but by the end of the year, I think, we're going to be in a whole different spot. What an exciting time. This is so cool.
Yeah. And I want to say on that, something that Dan said earlier, and I'm sure you saw that, the greatest weakness is a bunch of disorganized people. So we're decentralized and we can self-govern and organize, but if we're all just disorganized, we'll be our greatest weakness. So it's cool to see things like proxies and like recently, like the Empower Women proxy that they shared that thing on Reddit. It's exciting to see people organize what their values are and what they're excited about, and then create kind of a little self-governed community to help facilitate growth and facilitate fair share of accountability or voice or whatever that may be. It's just like you're saying, it's just really exciting. And I just encourage people that, like the recently started EOS math Telegram group.
Yeah.
If you're really good at something, you have passion about it, please organize yourself or ask someone to help you organize and to send you the people that would be interested your way, because the more that we're self-governed and organizing and strong within what our passions are and what we believe, the stronger we'll be overall, because they're, the weakest link is going to be your greatest downfall. So we should really continue to band together, even if we have differences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And on that note, big kudos to EOS Alliance. Big kudos to all the people who are working on the worker proposal system, the group of people working on URI, the people like June who are doing EOS Ignite and putting out content to the, to the public.
And to you.
Yeah, thank you. But there is these groups of people all over the place working, and like you said, in a decentralized structure that we have, our biggest weakness and downfall is no organization. So even though some of the groups may have differing opinions on how things are going to go forward, that's our biggest strength. So these groups of people working together and being organized is our biggest strength. So we need all of us doing this. And so, big thank you to everyone who's part of any of those groups that's working on any of these things. I mean, that's why EOS is keep pushing forward. So, open debate is fantastic. This is a wonderful thing that we're doing, I think. So
I agree. And if you don't mind, I would like to plug that EOS Tribe is teamed up with OCI and Phil Mesnier, and we have a traveling dev workshop in which we teach smart contracts and then how to secure the smart contracts. And the first workshop was at Tulip. Our next workshop is in Denver, about a little under 3 weeks, I believe, or less, in October. And it's just really awesome to see all the different people, coming from Ethereum or different chains or just new and just developers that come and learn how to use the system and then how to secure it and the things they're building. I feel like it's important that we continue to nurture our devs and to think about them and then do our part as a community to have a solid, healthy foundation for them to be able to be creative and to create new things. So it's just exciting. I invite anyone out. We'll do another one in Oslo at the Crypto Finance thrown by BitSpace in November, right before the hackathon. So we'll be traveling around, and then the one after that will be in Tampa at DevCon. So I encourage everybody that's a dev, please come to DevCon. Ivan on Tech will be there. We'll all be there, get a VIP ticket and get on the yacht. Like, it'll be a fun event to encourage devs to come build here, like come build and grow on EOS. Like, we welcome you. Let's do it. Let's build it. Let's build the future, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And good. That's a great plug for EOS Tribe. EOS Tribe, you guys are one of my favorite BPs. I mean, so community focused, so much like grassroots actual building. So EOS Tribe has had my vote and will continue to have my vote. And I'd encourage other people to vote for EOS Tribe. Just this, the developer tutorials that you guys are traveling around doing. I went to the first, I'm not a developer, but I went to the Tulip developer conference with Phil Mesnier and Eugene Luzgin, I think, from EOS Tribe. Luzgin, yeah. These guys are like developer rock stars. Like, these guys are the the top of the line as far as EOS developers go. So if you have a chance to go to one of their workshops and you're a developer, I mean, it's like, I wouldn't miss that. So that's cool. You guys are going around doing that. So
thank you. And I wanted to say, like, if your wife wasn't able to go to that workshop, to have her hit me up, because we'd like to offer her something for any workshop that she can make coming up.
Cool.
I know she's developing, and we'd like to give her the opportunity to learn, to apply what she's developing to as well. So,
well, thank you. Thank you. I'll definitely.
Oh, and I signed up for FitBlocks.
Oh, cool. Nice.
I signed up for that. That's really cool.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. FitBlocks. We just made our first semi, we're still about to start building momentum, but we just made our first kind of 2-minute explainer video. So you'll be hearing more about that probably around the first of the year is when we're looking to start kind of building momentum. So
cool. I'm excited about that.
It's cool. Project. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So is there anything that we kind of glossed over that you'd like to go back and hit on, or any kind of final thoughts for the EOS community here?
I welcome you to come to the URI group, and it's not just a plug for the group. It's because Dan's fairly active in there, and if you have questions or concerns about the application of URI, or you want to dig into the numbers, we have a link to the EOS math group, which they're running out the numbers and spreadsheets and collaborating for Rex and for URI. And in the URI group, it's a group welcoming people to come and to kick the tires and to say that they don't like this or that, and to actually engage in a conversation with Dan himself about what their worries are and what his proposed solutions for those are. So it's better to come and be informed and educated and say your piece than to live in fear and worry and not actually know from the source of that which is the vision, So I just encourage you to come by and any questions. He's usually fairly active once a day, or if you I'm not saying he's going to be there once a day, but we see him pretty active in there. And when you say something that's not aligned with what he's thinking, he will engage with you. And it's fun to go down that journey together. And I invite you to come join us. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put the link for that in the show notes. And
okay. And the workshop is eosrise.io. So if anyone's interested in a dev workshop, eosrise.io, go there and join up. We'd love to have you. Yeah,
I'll also put your EOS Tribe and the link for EOS Rise in the show notes as well, so that people will be able to. I'll try to get the links for the things we talked about and put them in the show notes so people can click through on that pretty easy. So
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Anna. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, and to you, my crypto friends, this is the EOS Podcast. This is kind of my new endeavor I've been having a blast with. I've pumped out a ton of shows, and I'm going to continue to do that. I mean, I'm deep into EOS and have been for a while, and this is infinitely interesting to me. So I'll keep being curious, and I'll keep digging in, and I'll keep talking to really badass people like Anna, and
thank you.
Staying on the bleeding edge of what is going on with EOS. So until next time, my crypto friends, we'll talk to you later. Peace.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is just